Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are settling in for something that feels a little less like a lecture and a little more like a late-night hangout.
hmm
Where the conversation accidentally cracks open the secrets of the universe. You know the vibe, it's like 2 a.m., the music is low, and suddenly you're questioning the very nature of reality.
That is exactly the headspace we want to be in. It is definitely a mind-expanding session today. We are looking at a specific moment in time, or perhaps, as we'll learn, a specific moment outside of time.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, where philosophy meets what essentially amounts to psychic espionage.
I love that description, psychic espionage. It sounds like a Cold War thriller, but with more meditation and fewer trench coats.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
So before we jump into the deep end, we have to set the vibe. Imagine it's a Monday night, 9 p.m. It's December 6, 1965. We are in Elmira, New York. It's probably cold outside, typical upstate New York winter.
Right.
But inside an apartment, Jane Roberts, her husband Robert Butts, and the personality known as Seth are about to get to work.
It's a cozy scene, but the implications of what they're doing are, well, they're massive. And before we unpack the universe, we have a mandatory declaration to make.
We do.
We want to be crystal clear that this podcast will be distributed free of charge on all major platforms for educational purposes. We are here to learn, not to sell you a time machine.
Although, after today, you might feel like you've built one in your head.
Absolutely. No paywalls for the secrets of reality. Now let's introduce our source material properly.
Okay.
Today we are looking strictly at session 214 of the Early Sessions Book 5 of the Seth material, and date of record December 6, 1965.
This session is particularly fascinating to me because it blends this really high-level metaphysical theory, the nature of time and action, with very grounded, almost humorous, real-world tests.
Right, it's not just abstract.
Not at all. It's not just head-in-the-cloud stuff. They are actively trying to prove it works. The mission for this deep dive is to explore three things: the illusion of time, the power of intensity, and some surprisingly specific spying on a friend down in Washington, D.C. And we're going to talk about why your life might actually be a slow-motion replay of a single explosion.
Which is a wild concept.
It is. And honestly, it explains a lot about my chaotic 20s. And we're going to talk about a napkin.
A napkin from a discotheque, no less.
Exactly. A napkin that totally baffled the psychic senses because of
Yeah.
lighting. But we'll get there. We also need to give credit where it's due.
Of course.
All of this comes from the Seth material and the publisher New Awareness Network.
So let's set the stage with the cast of characters. Usually when you read philosophy or metaphysical texts, it's so dry, it's faceless.
Totally.
But Seth, the personality speaking through Jane Roberts, has a bit of a sense of humor about the people in the room, doesn't he?
And he really does. He gives them nicknames. It makes the whole thing feel so much more intimate, like a group of friends just hanging out.
Yeah.
So in this session, we are talking a lot about two friends of the couple, Peggy and Bill Gallagher. Now, Seth refers to Peggy as the cat lover.
Which, knowing Seth, I assume is ironic.
It's totally ironic. Peggy is actually afraid of cats.
Oh, of course she is.
It's this little inside joke Seth has. It kind of shows that he knows them better than they know themselves. Or at least he likes to, poke fun at their fears.
And that grounds it. It feels real.
It does. And then there's Bill Gallagher. Seth calls him the Jesuit.
Right. And for clarity, Bill isn't actually a priest or anything.
No, not at all. He calls him the Jesuit. Because Bill apparently has an endless supply of questions. He's the skeptic, the prober.
The guy who won't let a point go until he's completely dissected it.
Exactly.
Which is such a useful energy to have in these sessions. You need someone to kick the tires. You don't want an echo chamber when you're dealing with multidimensional reality.
Absolutely not. But in this specific session, the cat lover, Peggy, is the focus. And she's the focus because she isn't in Elmira. She's away on business.
She is in Washington, D.C., and this sets up the experiment portion of the evening. Seth had volunteered to tune in on Peggy while she was down in the Capitol.
But here is where it gets really interesting. They'd actually done a session the Friday before, an unscheduled one, where Seth made a whole bunch of predictions about this trip.
And this leads to a fascinating philosophical dilemma for Robert Butts, Jane's husband. He's the note-taker, the sort of anchor in the room.
Right.
And he's looking at this list of predictions Seth made, things like, you'll meet a woman in green, or you'll see a clock that doesn't work. And he starts wondering about the power of suggestion.
It's the classic self-fulfilling prophecy question, isn't it? If a psychic tells you, you are going to meet a man you don't like, Are you going to be predisposed to dislike
Yeah.
the next guy you meet?
Exactly.
Are you unconsciously scanning the room for him?
That's the question. Robert asks, since Peggy knows these predictions, is she unconsciously making them happen? It's such a valid question. It cuts to the core of how we interact with information.
Well, yeah. If I
Or-
tell you, notice the color red, you will see red everywhere. That's not magic. That's the reticular activating system in your brain working.
For sure. But let's look at the list of things Seth predicted on that Friday, because some of them seem, well, they seem a little resistant to simple suggestion.
Okay, let's run through them. He said she would meet a woman dressed in green. Okay, maybe she looks for someone in green. Maybe.
Plausible.
But he also mentioned a clock that doesn't keep proper time.
Which is such a random detail. How do you subconsciously manifest a broken clock in a public place?
Exactly. Unless she goes around breaking clocks, that one seems completely out of her control.
Right.
He said there would be 3 specific men she would associate with. And he said she would meet a man she does not like.
And that's the one Robert was most worried about, suggestion-wise. If she meets a perfectly nice guy, but he has, I don't know, a weird haircut, does she just decide, okay, this is the one I'm supposed to hate?
It's definitely possible.
Hmm.
But Seth also predicted a turnoff that leads to the wrong destination. And he gave specific numbers.
The numbers are the really tricky part.
Yeah, he gave the numbers 5 and 321.
And an unscheduled social engagement in a public place, not a home. So Peggy heads to D.C. with this whole list in her head. And Robert is sitting there in Elmira thinking, are we testing precognition here, or are we just testing psychology?
It's the suggestion versus precognition debate.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the backdrop for everything that happens in this session. But before Seth resolves that or even checks in on her, he decides to drop some seriously heavy philosophy.
He does.
About why prediction is even possible in the first place.
And this is where we have to put on our thinking caps. This is section 2 of our deep dive, the philosophy of time and action. Seth starts with a statement that sounds so simple, but is actually, well, it's brain-breaking.
Okay, lay it on me.
He says all action is basically spontaneous.
All action is spontaneous.
Yeah.
Let's unpack that, because to me, action feels linear. I pick up a cup, I drink my coffee, I put the cup down. That's a sequence, ABC.
And Seth would say that is your perception of the action, not the action itself.
Not perception.
Yes. He argues that we only experience time because our perception adds a duration to action. We think action takes up time. We think of time as a container that holds events.
Like a bucket. And the action is the water we pour into it.
That's a great way to put it. But Seth says, no, throw away the bucket. The dimensions of action have nothing to do with time. They have to do with intensity.
Intensity. That's a key word here. Say more about that.
He uses this beautiful analogy of a river. When we think of a river, we think of physical depth, right? We measure it in feet or meters.
Right. How deep is the water?
Seth says psychological experience has depth too. But you don't measure psychological depth in minutes or hours. You measure it in intensity.
Okay, that's interesting.
You travel through an experience only so far as your ability to handle its intensity allows.
That makes intuitive sense.
Yeah.
Think about a car crash versus, I don't know, waiting in line at the DMV.
Perfect example.
The crash might last 5 seconds. The line might last an hour. But the depth of the crash, the memory, the impact, the feeling is infinitely deeper. You traveled further into that reality in 5 seconds than you did in an hour of boredom.
That is it, precisely. And Seth goes even further. He says the psychological intensity isn't just a metaphor or some poetic feeling. It has a literal electromagnetic reality.
Wait, what? So my feelings are physics.
In the Sethian view, yes, an action is an experienced intensity. It has an electrical reality. And because all actions are basically spontaneous and simultaneous, everything is affecting everything else instantly.
Wow.
It's a web of intensity, not a line of dominoes.
This brings us to the slow-motion explosion analogy, which I think is the best visual in this entire session. If you take one thing away from this deep dive today, let it be this image.
It really helps clarify the whole concept. Seth asks us to imagine a gigantic, spontaneous explosion.
Okay, I'm picturing it, like a Big Bang type of thing, a massive release of energy.
Now, if you were standing outside of time, if you were a god or, I don't know, a photon, you would see that explosion happen all at once, instantaneous, a single event.
Right. Boom, done.
But we are viewing it through our physical senses, and our senses, he says, act like a slow camera, like a high-speed camera that shoots at 10,000 frames per second.
Oh, I love those videos.
Yeah.
Where you see the water balloon pop and the rubber just peels back slowly, and you see every single drop.
Exactly. So when we play the tape back of this explosion, what do we see? We see a spark, Then we see a light growing. Then we see debris moving outward. We see a sequence. We see a beginning, a middle, and an end.
We see a story, we see time.
But the reality was instant. We are just playing it back slowly to make sense of it. Seth suggests that what we call cause and effect is just us watching the slow-motion debris of a spontaneous reality.
That is wild. So we are all just living in a super slow-motion replay of something that already happened.
In a sense, yes. Or rather, something that is happening all at once, but we are parsing it out bit by bit because our brains, our senses, can't handle the whole explosion at one time.
It's like when you're watching a movie. The whole movie exists on the reel in the projection booth at the same time, right?
Yeah.
The ending is there, sitting right next to the beginning.
That's a great way to put it.
The film strip holds the entire timeline simultaneously. But as the viewer in the seat, you have to watch frame 1, then frame 2, then frame 3.
You can't experience the ending until you've sat through the middle, even though the ending already exists on the film.
So who is the projectionist? I mean, who or what is forcing us to watch it frame by frame?
Seth says it's the ego.
Ah, the ego. The villain of the story.
Not a villain, really. More like a control freak middle manager.
I think we all know one of those.
The ego attempts to set itself up and apart from action. It wants to feel dominant. It wants to be the manipulator of physical reality. To do that, it needs rules. It needs cause and effect. It needs linear time.
Because if everything happened at once, the ego couldn't claim credit for causing anything. It couldn't say, I did this, so that happened.
Exactly. If the ego admitted that time doesn't really exist, that the future and the past are all happening now, it would feel like it lost its function. It would feel small and irrelevant.
It would have a full-blown existential crisis. If I don't control the future, what am I even doing here?
Precisely. So it creates what Seth calls artificial precepts of continuity just to feel secure. But Seth points out that the inner self, the deeper subconscious, it doesn't buy into this illusion. The inner self is free.
And this is why things like precognition work, right? This is the mechanic behind the psychic spying.
Correct. The inner self isn't bound by the slow-motion camera. It can see the whole explosion. It can see the future frames because they are already there on the reel.
So when Jane or Seth predict something Peggy's going to do in Washington, they aren't guessing the future. They aren't calculating odds. They're just looking at a part of the film reel that the ego hasn't played yet for most of us.
Precisely. But the ego usually rejects this information. Seth says, as a rule, the ego will not even accept the information that is derived in such a manner. For to do so would be to deny those artificial precepts of continuity upon which it feels its dominance rests.
So essentially, the ego just sticks its fingers in its ears and says, la, 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 I can't hear you. Because admitting you can know the future breaks its entire rule book.
And Seth creates a really important distinction here between our social structures and actual reality. He says, and I think this is a key quote to pull out, your institutions, both cultural and educational, may be dependent upon time as a series of moments, but physical reality itself is not.
That's a bumper sticker right there. Physical reality doesn't care about your clock.
It really emphasizes that we built a society on what he sees as a misunderstanding of how the universe works. We organize our whole lives around a ticking hand that doesn't actually represent the nature of action.
So we have this high concept theory. Time is an illusion, the ego is a control freak, and the inner self can see everything. Now let's see if Seth can put his money where his mouth is. Let's go to Washington, D.C.
Section 4, remote viewing the cat lover.
So Peggy is in D.C. It's Monday night. Seth, speaking through Jane and Elmira, attempts to see what she's doing right at that moment.
And remember, this is 1965. I have to keep stressing this. No GPS, no cell phones, no text messages. They can't just check her Instagram story or find my friends.
Not at all.
Peggy is in a black hole as far as normal communication is concerned.
Right. This is pure, blind, remote viewing. So Seth starts firing off data points. First, he mentions a room number. He sees room 312.
Now, recall that on Friday, he predicted the number 321. Here he says 312. It's that scrambling effect again.
It's like dyslexia, the psychic eye.
In a way, it's very common in this kind of material. The raw data comes in, the numbers 3, 2, 1, but the conscious mind sometimes puts them in the wrong order. Later in the session, he also mentions 421, so he's circling around these same digits.
Then he tunes into the topic of the meeting Peggy is attending. He says it's a discussion about the survival of the nation.
He clarifies, though, that this might not be the formal title on the program, but that survival is the strong issue being discussed. It's the emotional core of the meeting.
That sounds pretty intense. He also describes the characters in the room. He mentions a tow-headed man that Peggy doesn't like.
Which connects right back to the prediction of the man she dislikes.
Exactly. He sees a man with a camera slung over his shoulder, and he gets very specific about fashion. He sees a pointed handkerchief in a breast pocket with an initial on it, maybe a C or a G.
These are such tiny details. A pointed handkerchief, that's not something you just guess. It's too specific.
And he describes the setting, a hotel on a corner, her room is above the third floor, and the meeting room has theater-type chairs rather than benches.
These are all very visual, verifiable details. It's like he's describing a photograph. But then, right in the middle of this spy mission, Seth does something that just cracks me up. He pivots completely.
Oh yeah, the Jesuit's ulcer.
Laughs. Yes. Right out of nowhere.
He suddenly says, incidentally, our Jesuit ulcer bothers him this evening quite strongly.
He's talking about Bill Gallagher back in Elmira. It's such a human moment. Here's this multi-dimensional entity discussing the non-existence of time and the survival of the nation.
And he stops to say, by the way, Bill, I know your stomach hurts.
It just shows that Seth is plugged in to the people in the room just as much as the people in D.C. It highlights that casual, chatty nature of these sessions. It's not all doom and gloom prophecies, it's a check-in.
That's a good point. It also reinforces that idea of intensity we talked about earlier.
So.
Well, Bill's pain was an intense signal in that room, even though Seth was looking at D.C. The electromagnetic reality of Bill's ulcer was flashing right next to him, so he acknowledged it.
That makes perfect sense. Wow. Now, speaking of picking things up, we get to Section 5, the envelope test. This is where we get to play detective.
Yes, I love these parts.
This is one of the standard protocols they use to test Jane's ability without the possibility of, a telepathy from Robert. Robert would put an object in a sealed double envelope. Jane had never seen it. She would hold it to her forehead and try to get impressions.
It's the classic psychic test. So tonight's object is a paper napkin, but not just any napkin. It's from a visit Robert and Jane took to a local discotheque.
And we have to pause and appreciate the 1965 of it all, the discotheque.
I hear the go-go boots from here.
Yeah.
So inside the envelope is this napkin. What does Seth or Jane pick up?
Several hits, or accurate descriptions, almost immediately. Seth says he senses something turned up.
Fact check on that.
Fact.
Yeah.
When the waitress put the napkins on the table at the club, the corner of the specific napkin was folded or turned up. It was a distinct physical feature.
Okay, that's a good start. What else?
Seth sees purple and large letters.
Fact check.
The word discotheque was printed on the napkin in large letters. And the ink was a blue-red mix that looked very purple.
Okay, so far so good. He's 2 for 2.
He also mentions a connection to another person.
Which they linked to a dancer they had been watching at the club, someone they were focusing on.
Right. But then we get to the mystery, the aha moment of the whole episode. This is where the educational part really kicks in. Seth reports seeing white, snow white, blinding white.
And Jane's mind even starts associating it with a photograph of a snowy house because the impression of white is so overwhelming. She starts describing a house in winter.
Right, which seems like a total miss.
Yeah. It's a paper napkin. It's white, sure, but blinding snow white. That seems like a huge exaggeration. If I hold a napkin to my head, I don't scream blinding white.
Until you remember the environment where the object originated.
The discotheque.
Exactly. What kind of lighting did they have at a discotheque in 1965, or even today, really?
Oh, wow. Ultraviolet.
Black lights.
Precisely. Robert notes in the transcript that when the entertainment began, the UV lights came on. And if you've ever worn a white shirt under a black light, you know what happens.
It glows. It practically screams at you. It vibrates with light. It becomes blinding white. Seth was picking up on the sensory data of the object as it was experienced in that specific moment of intensity, not just as it sat there in the envelope in the dark room.
That is fascinating. So the psychic impression wasn't just, this is a piece of paper. It was, this is a blinding white object.
Yeah.
It captured the memory of the light.
And it explains the distortion. Jane's conscious mind, her ego, if you will, got the signal blinding white. Her brain said, what do I know that's blinding white? Snow. So she started talking about a snowy house.
That's a perfect example of how the signal gets interpreted or misinterpreted by the receiver. The raw data was correct, blinding white, but the translation into snow was slightly off because her brain tried to make logical sense of it.
And there is one more detail that just clinches this whole UV theory. Seth mentions yellow as in sunlight.
Now, a white napkin isn't yellow. That seems like a clear miss.
No. But under the UV light, Robert and Jane had noticed something a little embarrassing during their night out. There was a bright yellow stain on Jane's blouse and on her hands.
Oof. Mystery stains at the disco. Never a good look.
It was invisible in normal light. They didn't even know it was there. But under the black light, it glowed bright yellow.
So Seth picked up on the hidden yellow stain that was only visible in that one specific lighting condition.
Exactly. It confirms that the psychic data was locking on to that specific sensory experience at the discotheque. It's a brilliant validation of how specific these impressions can be. It wasn't just guessing napkin, it was reliving the sensory experience of the napkin.
It really is. It's like forensic evidence of a psychic event, the case of the glowing napkin.
It illustrates the difference between the raw input and the interpretation. The yellow and blinding white were raw data. The snow was the mind trying to make sense of it. For anyone interested in how intuition works, this is just a masterclass. You get the flash of insight, but your brain tries to dress it up in familiar clothes.
Amazing. Moving on to Section 6, Seth doesn't stop there. He does a quick flyby of another target, a Dr. In-Stream.
Yeah, just a brief mention here. He describes a cocktail party, a nubby fabric, again, very tactile, sensory, and mentions a Dr. Erickson. He also throws out a date, January 3rd. It's just this rapid-fire remote viewing.
And then they talk about dreams. Jane is apparently writing a book on dreams during this time.
Which is fitting, since dreams are another state where the ego finally relaxes and the inner self gets to take over for a bit.
Seth reviews her book. He says it's a very good start, but suggests she change the title.
Everyone's a critic, even
Yeah.
the disembodied one.
Right. But the interesting part here is about Robert's dreams. He had been dreaming about his brother, Bill.
Right, and Robert had these vivid dreams about his brother, who they only see maybe twice a year. He didn't think much of it, just, oh, I dreamt of Bill. But Seth says, no, these are significant precognitive dreams.
Because?
Because the brother, Bill, was due for a surprise visit the very next week.
They didn't know he was coming.
They had no idea. Robert's inner self knew the brother was coming, even though his conscious mind didn't. The explosion of the visit had already happened in the broad reality. Robert just caught a glimpse of the frame before it played out on the screen of his life.
It ties everything back to the main theme. The information is always there, we just filter it out. The visit wasn't a surprise to the inner self, only to the ego.
Which brings us to the conclusion and the practical advice Seth offers in Section 7.
You'd think an entity describing the illusion of time would give advice like meditate on the void or transcend your body. But Seth is surprisingly practical. He suggests yoga.
Specifically, daily yoga exercises. He says they unify various portions of the self.
I love that phrasing, unifying the self. It's about getting the ego and the inner self to actually talk to each other, so maybe you don't have to be blindsided by the slow motion explosion. You can see it coming.
And he also orders a vacation.
The best kind of advice you can get from a multidimensional being.
He tells Jane to take a break from psychic work during Christmas week. He says, I would suggest that Rupert rest from psychic affairs entirely.
Rupert being his name for Jane's male aspect or her inner self.
Correct. It shows that this work is taxing. It requires energy. You can't just be a radio receiver 24/7 without burning out the tubes.
Even psychics need a holiday break. So let's summarize the key insights from this deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground here.
First, time. It is a tool of the ego, not a law of physics. We created the clock to feel in control, but reality is spontaneous and simultaneous.
Second, intensity. Life isn't measured in length, it's measured in depth. A moment of high intensity, like a blinding white napkin or a sudden surprise visit, ripples out and creates our reality more than 1,000 boring moments ever could.
And third, connection. We are connected to each other and to our own futures outside of physical space. We can tune in on a friend in DC or a brother coming to visit because on some deeper level, we are already there with them.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, at the end of the day?
Well, it means you might want to stop looking at your watch so much.
Seriously, don't let your ego boss you around with clocks.
But more importantly, pay attention to those irrational impulses. That dream about a friend you haven't seen in years. That sudden image of a blinding white something. That gut feeling that you shouldn't go down a certain street.
It might not be a coincidence. It might be your inner self watching the movie a few frames ahead of you. It might be the spontaneous action bleeding through the slow motion replay.
And if you want to verify these ideas yourself, and we always encourage you to be the scientist of your own experience, you need to go to the source. Don't just take our word for it.
Definitely. Study the Seth material books yourself. You can visit the New Awareness Network website and bookstore at sethcenter.com. the early sessions.
Read the sessions. Look at the raw data. See how they struggled with these questions back in 1965? It's a fascinating journey to see them test and fail and succeed and question everything.
We're going to leave you with one final provocative thought to chew on.
If time is just a slow motion explosion and we are just watching the replay, what happens if you learn to hit fast forward or rewind?
Or what if you realize you're the one holding the remote control?
That is a dangerous thought, but a very fun one.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you in the next moment.
Or maybe we've already seen you.
Good night, everyone.